communication is all different levels. That behaviors that children present are communication, because a lot of times we'll say, use your words, tell us what you think, tell us, but they are, by their behavior, exhibiting communication.
That their behavior is showing us what they're trying to communicate to us.
Which that was something that stuck out to me, and the first time he was there he talked about power struggles, how a lot of times we want the kid to do what we want them to do, so is it a matter of this is something they really need to be doing or need to be learning, or is it just us wanting to be in control? So that stuck out a lot, just kind of modifying those behaviors as to what actually needs to take place rather than what I want to take place.
Well, and I think one of the most important things that he shared with us, and that his theme through his website, through his presentations, are that the paradigm is shifting. We don't have the same children that we even had as educators 10 years ago. We for sure don't have the same classrooms that we attended or that were earlier. And so we have changing children, we have changing culture, we have changing society, and we're having to reel with that. And one of another statement that he just, I think, was very strong in giving us short statements that we could grasp onto was that attention magnifies behavior. Whereas from old school, we call out the behavior, we identify it, there's remorse, and change is the intended outcome. Where now we see children, because they are not brought up in that relationship of healthy authoritative, that they will then magnify and it'll escalate. And so those principles of how, like you said, power struggle, to use some of the strategies to minimize the attention, to divert the power struggle, to stay out of it, rather than old school, we're going to assert it and gain control.
I thought it was really helpful to know that children don't play those games that they used to play, and that's why, it's not just the video games and the TV that they're watching, but it's the fact that they're not interacting with their peers. That they're not learning those social skills, like, when they played games like Red Rover, and, they were outside playing, jumping rope and things like that, that now they're just sitting isolated. And that was really, informative. That's something I never thought about. Was a lack of socialization, not just the impact of the video games and the TV shows that they were watching causing this behavior, but it was just a lack of socialization.
The power of interaction.
Yeah, one of my biggest things I took from him was that their behavioral age was not always their academic age or their chronological age, that you had to determine where they were emotionally and behaviorally and at what age they're acting within. And I see it on a daily basis with one of my students, cannot keep his hands to himself, in first grade. And so we've created modifications, kind of, walking down the hallway as a big, you've got to stay in line, you've got to keep your hands to yourself. Well, he absolutely cannot do it. And so now he has the opportunity, anytime he feels like he can't, he comes up next to me, and without even saying anything, without being in trouble, he comes up and he'll grasp onto my arm, and he'll like rub my arm and hold onto my hand or feel my hand as he walks down the hall. But then I don't have to get on him for doing it to another student. And so we try to, it's between that control and then what's appropriate and what we want them to do. So that was huge.
Yeah. I liked his, Rebecca and I were talking about the reading strategies. His big thing is movement and socialization, that they need to move more. And so whenever we do a read aloud, allowing them to move, along with the book and things that are appropriate, and repeating things from the book or reading parts of the book with the teacher allows that movement and socialization. And Rebecca said that.
Well, and I was telling Sabrina, something that stuck out to me was how he talked about if you're getting those kids actively engaged with you, that you're less likely to see the behaviors. So when you're reading a book, make it become interactive and give them something to mimic you back or something to say with it. And we were talking too, I love the movement, like how you were saying how their attention span is only their age plus or minus 2. And so what we do a lot of is the socialization where they're able to go walk around the room and find a partner. And we did it the same way he did it during our conference, where maybe the first time they're allowed to go pick their own partner, and maybe the second time I'm playing music, and when the music stops, their closest person to them is their partner. And we'll do nouns, verbs, letter of the week, phonemic awareness, where they're back to back. The music stops, so they're getting movement from the song. They're actually actively engaged with it. They're getting the socialization of walking around, and then once the music stops, they turn and face their partner, and then whatever objective we're working on, if it's a proper noun, then the first one to say it wins. And I like it because it's getting the movement going, and then that struggling learner is actually still able to hear everyone around them, and they feel successful.
That's true. And the game, that same concept, the game where the kids sit back to back and they're either answering one of my questions or a question they're doing, and then they turn and face and check their answer with each other and not know, or check each other, and that's a fun game for them.
He had so many strategies that I find myself that I use quite often. The shine your eyes on me, I use that. And the games, like the turning with the partner and turning around, and we do it with counting by 5s and 10s. We do the cross, we talked about the cross. Crossing the midline, and I try to incorporate that. Spinning around, we do lots of spinning motions because you talked about how that's so good for their brains. And
when, like you said, the transition, or I was thinking the transitions, as they transition, giving them a way to transition, like, we're transitioning like we're robots, or we're go to get your coat, like you're
big movement, but it's constructive.
But constructive movement, a reason to move the way you want. So they still feel like they're moving,
right,
but you're still controlling how they're.
Well, I think that's so exciting as an educator to me, both in hearing his presentation and all the strategies that they're coming from, and some of the brain gym, which we'll talk about later, those kind of things, that it's all brain research based, and it's making so much sense. It's like pilots not flying just by sight anymore. You have an instrument panel because we know what's going on in the brain, and so we're able to do these more targeted strategies, which many times are not what we were trained in earlier, but they're so effective because it's how the children are learning, especially how they're learning today, and that how critical movement is to their ability to learn. I'll never forget one of my older students did the typical teacher sit down so you can listen. It's like he said, I can listen or I can sit down, but you have to choose. And so that's so much with the kids, that they need the movement in order to learn, and it's changing how we do things, and which helps them.
And I appreciated that he sort of brought to light that just because your classroom is quiet doesn't mean there's learning going on. Right. That it's okay to have noise, and it's okay for the kids to move around, and
constructive chaos.
Right. And because I think in the past a lot of us were under the impression that they have to be sitting, they have to be quiet. That's what a good classroom looks like. And so it was kind of refreshing to know that a good classroom isn't always quiet, and they're not always sitting, that they're up and they're moving, they're doing. So.
Well, and the validation of where we're also going with rigor and increasing the critical thinking of our kids, what that looks like, but yet balancing that with good age-appropriate behavioral expectations of the children, that you can do both. You don't have to have either or, and he has such great strategies in how to integrate those, how to challenge that higher level thinking, but still incorporating the movement that children, especially this age, need to have continually for that learning to happen. And just a lot of validation as teachers.
I think something too that stuck out for me too is where he talked about making sure that you communicate with your parents, and not always the negative, because he said, they're doing all they can do, and they're doing what they know how to do. We're the educators, and we're still struggling with it. And a lot of these parents he talked about too may not even have graduated from high school, and we don't know what education they come back with, so they're doing the best they can. And if we're just giving them negative, at some point the parent themselves is going to shut down and just say they can't support us anymore, they don't know what to do. So that really stuck out for me again too, to make sure that I'm pointing out all the positives with my students and keeping that line of communication open.
And along with that, he also was real good about helping us to look for those positive things in our kids, because a lot of times all we see is, she's picking on the other kids, she won't be quiet, he won't sit still, he won't do this, but actually look for the things that they're doing right and to build on those, rather than doing the opposite, which is, I think, kind of what we tend to do, is we tend to just see what's in front of us. And so I thought he was real helpful in helping me to think about looking past that and looking for what that child's strengths are and building on those strengths.
Well, I think he just showed us in an overall aspect to let go a little bit. I mean, that was my thought, and even, following his Facebook page and his website, and it's just to not go into that crazy land with the parents and the kids, and to expect, like during spring, to expect them not to behave exactly the way they, you want them to, and to accept, some of it. You're still trying to curb some of it, but to let it go, and to, tomorrow's a new day, and to start fresh every day.
And that was really refreshing for me
Mm-hmm.
to just kind of be able to breathe and say,
It is. It just was so validating, and following the Facebook page has been wonderful, because we're always so focused on the kids, but he tends to bring the lens back to what might be happening with us as teachers, as peers and colleagues, and same kind of crazy land going on up here that's going on with our children. And when we identify what it looks like as us as adults, it's like, oh, that's what's going on in their little hearts and minds, and just the perspective. He just gives a refreshing perspective that those of us that are in this because we're so committed to it get so weary, because there's just so much barrage of information and expectation, and how do we do that? And still, like you said, they're 5. They're still
Remember,
5.
they're still